Which camera am I looking at?
This one. This one.
Oh, right here. Okay. Welcome to Books That Matter, People Who Matter, the program dedicated to promoting reading among all segments of the viewing audience. I'm your host, Leroy Baylor, thankful to the Most High for blessing us with another day to be with you and you to be with us. Today's program is going to be a review of a slice of American history taking place in the good old New York, New York, and coming to you by way of Broadway and Harlem. We're talking about a young man in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s, who was one of the greatest and most important choreographers, directors, and producers in the entertainment field. His name is Leonard Harper, and we have as our guest his grandson, Grant Reed Harper. Welcome to Books That Matter, People Who Matter.
It's my honor to be on the show with you, Brother Leroy.
Let's talk about your dad and the significance of this book, Rhythm for Sale.
Well, I started off doing research at the County Cullen Library in the Schaumburg and looking at the old newspapers and all of the texts. And then I decided to self-publish my book based upon my research. And it took several editions for me to get it to where it is now, but it's like almost perfect. I didn't know my grandfather. I never met him. I didn't know what he looked like. So this was my way of spending over 20 years getting to know him and getting to know his spirit. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing such a deep research at the Schaumburg that the security guards would turn the lights on and off to tell me to leave. Mm-hmm. But it was so, I was looking at the microfiche and almost like I was so tired, I was almost hallucinating. And I was reading about the people that worked with my grandfather that were forgotten. And it was like they were saying to me, it's not just your grandfather's story, it's our stories too. Mm-hmm. Please respect what we went through. Mm-hmm. And his heyday was during the Jazz Age and the Harlem Renaissance. And a lot of those books that I read when I was doing the research were basically saying blacks in Harlem were singing and dancing for tips, and they were happy getting the tips. I wanted to show the good and the bad, and these were human beings just like we are, and they had all of the multi-dimensions. So like when they talk about the Cotton Club, they say, well, Duke Ellington performed there, Lena Horne performed there. They don't write about how they were not allowed to use the toilet facilities. Mm. So they would have to go on the sidewalk on Lenox Avenue and bring their own brown bags, and they were on their own. And that was a part of the racism.
In Harlem.
In Harlem.
Okay, let's go back. What led you to doing research on your grandfather? What was it?
Okay, it was by chance. I worked in the film industry for about over 30 years, and I worked on Do the Right Thing with Spike Lee, and I wanted to get a record. He wrote a book with Leroy Jones's daughter about the making of Do the Right Thing, and on one page it said that he had to meet with me and Robert De Niro. And I wanted to make a copy of that page for myself, for my own records. As I was leaving the County Cullen Library, I saw a Harlem Renaissance book on the librarian's desk, and it was like a Harlem Renaissance dictionary. Mm-hmm. And one paragraph, I said, let me see if they have my grandfather. His first name was spelled wrong. It was like Leon Harper. But the paragraph seemed like it could have been my grandfather. And on the bottom it said BB. And the librarian says, you need to go around the block to the Schaumburg and get blacks in blackface. I went around to the Schaumburg, I got blacks in blackface. It spelled my grandfather's name properly, Leonard Harper, and it was 8 pages. Then I started doing all the research on the text. Then I went down to this senior citizen's house, one of my friend's aunts in the village, and she was walking around the kitchen. I said, with a lot of soul, even though she was a senior citizen, I said, were you a dancer? And she told me, yeah, I was in a group called Salt and Pepper, not the hip-hop one. Mm-hmm. And then I told her my grandfather's name, and she said, we used to dance for your grandfather at the Apollo. And she said, you need to go back to the Schaumburg and get on those microfiche, because all the black newspapers wrote about all of us back then. And that's when my deep research started coming. And I cross-checked everything. Like, my grandfather did a show called Plantation Days at the Lafayette Theater. It went to England. George Gershwin went with him, and J.P. Johnson was his musical conductor. And George Gershwin was doing the show that sandwiched my grandfather's show, Plantation Days. George Gershwin did The Rainbow. They hated him because he was white, because it was right after World War I, and they felt he was taking away British theatrical people's jobs. They hated my grandfather and his entire troupe because they were Americans, plus they were black. So they got a lot of hatred when they were doing the shows. But a strange thing happened. Between the first night of the show, the King's wardrobe supervisor, niece, was in The Rainbow, the white show. So Queen Mary brought all the royals to see the show, and they loved jazz anyway, secretly. They would be sneaking out and going to the Criterion Guild from Buckingham Palace. So when the royals clapped and gave it the approval, that's when everybody else gave the approval.
Now, as you do this research, you come across names that are saying to you, in effect, look, it's not about your grandfather only, it's about us.
Yes.
Talk about that feeling. Talk about how that connection was made.
Well, I personally experienced a lot of racism in the motion picture industry. And today you do not see that many black people in production supervisory jobs or department head jobs. There's a reason for that. Most of the people that moved up and got those jobs have purposely kept blacks out. They like to look at us as infantiles. They give us jobs parking cars, getting potato chips and sodas, and doing security. But once you start thinking, they get scared. And if you do a good job, they really get scared. And they have cut black people out for years. All you have to do, there's a thing called IMDb, Internet Movie Database. You'll see all of these shows from the time these people started to now. And you look at the names of the people that were the department heads and the production supervisors, 99% of them are white. I've seen a lot of people before me and after me that were very talented, but they can't get those positions because of the racism, and it's hidden and nobody talks about it. So that experience helped me, it sensitized me towards my grandfather's people's experience. Like, he worked at Connie's Inn. That was his main, he was the in-house producer at Connie's Inn. They were less racist than the Cotton Club, because Cotton Club would outright steal people's ideas and they couldn't do anything about it. Connie's Inn, they gave my grandfather a little bit more freedom. But what happened was all the hoity-toity white people that would come in there, the rich people from Park Avenue, after a while they started complaining that they didn't want to be rubbing elbows and up too close with the darker skinned people. So they forced my grandfather to change his chorus line and make them light-skinned and nearly white because they felt more comfortable. They couldn't do anything about Bojangles and Ethel Waters' skin complexion. They were headliners. But they were able to get him to take out the darker-skinned women from the chorus lines because they felt more comfortable with light-skinned women.
Okay. In reading your book, Rhythm for Sale, I experienced it as the writer, you, being there or having been told. But you've gotten the majority of this from the research.
Well, I got a lot of it from I knew my grandmother's friends that were in show business, but she
grandmother's friends.
My grandmother's friends, because she tried to be in show business, but it didn't work out, and she didn't marry my grandfather. He was married. His wife lived 2 blocks away, so she didn't want to talk about it, because back then she had my mother out of wedlock, and they're very strong with the church. So when I came around, she didn't want to talk about it. But I was around all of her show business friends. Like when I worked on the Cotton Club movie for Francis Coppola, when I went out to Astoria Studios, Norma Jean Darden was one of the technical researchers, and she knew my family, so she brought me into that particular day. They had all the senior citizen Cotton Club women sitting on the chairs, making them feel good like they were part of it, So Norma Jean says, ladies, I'd like to introduce you to Grant Reed, and they rolled their eyes when they saw me. They said, oh, we know him, honey. We don't want to meet him. So I asked my grandmother, why are these ladies so sour on me? She said, that's because when you was down at Chicken Bone Beach as a little boy in Atlantic City, you used to kick sand in their faces, and they still resented. But I was able to know those people.
Chicken Bone Beach.
Yeah. Chicken Bone Beach was the black section because they didn't want the black people in Atlantic City to be on any other parts of the beach.
Chicken Bone Beach.
Because Chicken Bone Beach.
We had the same thing in Reese Beach. I think it was number 7. When we went out there as youngsters, we would say, all right, we're going, whatever the number it was.
Yeah.
Could have been 7, 8, 9. I don't know what it was. It was 9. I got some chorus help up here. It was beach number 9. So you'd never get lost. Come to number 9. And when you went to number 9, that was Chicken Bone Beach.
That was the Chicken Bone Beach. Yeah.
Now, let's go back to your grandfather, because folks will find your book, Rhythm for Sale, a very informative, very entertaining read. What were the innovations that your grandfather brought to the musical industry, the musical show industry?
Well, he had that, like, what he did was uptown style floor shows, nightclub floor shows, and he brought that down to Times Square. First, when he came back from England doing his show Plantation Days at the Leicester Theatre in London, he integrated Broadway, because on Broadway was vaudeville. You know, the people with the little funny dogs running around and the little clown hats and the, all that. And when he brought a show, before that, he had a show called Put and Take with Jack Johnson and his wife. He was in it. They couldn't believe the talent that the Southern black people had, their Southern roots, and the fast dancing that my grandfather had. So then they brought him to Chicago, and then he did Plantation Days. After Plantation Days came back from Europe, he integrated Broadway. He worked at the Hollywood Inn downtown, and that was run by gangster Lucky Luciano. And while he was down there, all the theater producers would come and see what he had. He had a variety, but he also had the fast dancing, and for the first time he humanized they call them colored people, black people, by having romantic scenes. Mm-hmm. Like he'll do a number with a black man and a black woman singing like on the countryside. And that was a first, and that humanized us, and it made a lot of the white audience say, wait a minute, these might be people too. We want to know about Ethel Waters. We want to know about Bessie Smith. So they wanted to know about the personalities behind what he was doing on stage, and that helped humanize us. Mm-hmm. And then he discovered Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was having a lot of problems at the time, and he put him in hot chocolates. They put it, Connie's hot chocolates was really Leonard Harper's hot chocolates, because it was the sum total of everything he learned in his whole life, entertainment-wise.
Flush it out.
Well, Connie's was Connie's Inn. His boss at Connie's Inn.
Are we talking about Connie's Inn that was torn down upstairs? Was that Connie's? When we talk about Connie's, it was on 7th Avenue?
It was 7th Avenue next to the Lafayette Theater.
Okay.
And it was just...
Right next to the Lafayette
Right next to the Lafayette Theater.
Okay.
And it was torn down recently, and they're building apartment buildings.
Right.
It's called the Lafayette Building.
Okay. All right.
And Connie's Inn was downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Dutch Schultz was... You had to have a gangster behind you when you had a nightclub. So, with the illegal liquor and the cigarettes, Dutch Schultz was behind Connie's Inn. Connie Immerman was the owner, and George, his brother. So, but Dutch Schultz bankrolled Hot Chocolates, which was my grandfather's show on Broadway, where Ain't Misbehaving and Black and Blue came from. It was the first time 3 black men ever were the creative forces behind any show on Broadway. Mm-hmm. That was Leonard Harper, Thomas Fatzwaller, and Andy Razov.
Yeah.
So when that show came out, it was such a wonderful hit. Dutch Schultz, by putting his money up, he threatened my grandfather and the other 2 creators. He said, I want you to make a darky number in a song that makes fun of a black woman.
Who's saying that?
Dutch Schultz.
He's financing...
the show.
And he says... The show, the complexion of the show. Just give us a complexion of the show.
It was the same. It was a ride. It was just like taking what was in Connie's my grandfather's floor shows, and bringing them to the Great White Way, mm-hmm. and putting them on Broadway.
It was a show.
Yeah.
And it had humanizing elements within the show.
Yes.
And it was a show that was entertaining, that had the attention of audiences, the what you call the word of mouth built it on it.
Big time.
Okay, he wants inserted into this show.
A number making fun of a black woman.
Making fun of a black
woman. Right, like they used to. most of like a minstrel type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what Andy Razov did was he wrote Black and Blue, and that's considered the first African American protest song on Broadway. Black and Blue, because the way my grandfather had the singer dressed in all white, satin bed, everything white, satin, beautiful, and she was dark skinned with those dark skin, and she's singing and making fun of I'm black and I'm blue, you know, like making fun of herself.
Mm-hmm.
The whole show, the whole song, the whole number.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very end, Dakota, she says, "But I feel like I'm white inside, like you."
Mm-hmm.
The audience froze. And then Dutch Schultz tried to figure out a way to kill Andy Razov by setting him up to see one of his favorite girls at
Wow.
Polyada's Madame, who was a brothel. And if Andy Razov had touched Dutch Schultz's favorite girl, it would have gave him license to have him killed.
Okay. You're getting this from word of mouth from some of these women who used to be in the chorus, or you're getting this from
Books, newspaper articles. I mean,
and they laid that out in there.
They laid it out in the newspapers, articles, and other people did research, and I tied them in.
Mm-hmm.
Like I found out, like I was speaking at a thing in New Jersey because my grandfather helped Oscar Michaud direct the first all-black talkie,
Yeah.
The Exile, and I spoke at they gave me an award for the research on that in New Jersey, and a lady had written a book about Oscar Michaud for years, you know. And I started talking about stuff that she never heard of. She tried to cut me off. I was talking about how he was, you know, he was sued by Frank Schiffman. Frank Schiffman was the owner of the Lafayette Theater.
Okay.
And, you know, Oscar Michaud was always in financial difficulty.
Yeah.
And what he had been trying to get my grandfather to work with him as a co-director in his movies for years because my grandfather had the talent.
Mm-hmm.
So he was trying to use my grandfather's talent base, and the way they got my grandfather to get involved with the Exile was because Frank Schiffman was the president of Lafayette Motion Pictures, which was Oscar Michaud's motion picture company. But and everything was working out fine until the movie came out and it was, you know, poor editing. He didn't have the funds to do it right, and it got bad reviews. And then they started arguing and fighting, and legal hassles came in.
Going back to Schultz, the producer of the
Hot Chocolates.
Hot Chocolate, and the insertion of where did you trace that to? When I'm saying his motives, his springs and motives, what did you pick up on that? He didn't just come out of the blue and say, "I want this in there."
Well, he had a lot of money, and Connie's Inn was his place.
Yeah, but the idea of the show is a profitable show. The show is getting audiences. He wants this piece inserted. Did you detect where that idea came from in his head that he reflected to your grandfather?
It was a general thing. All of them had to bend towards the racism. A lot of the audience were not happy with seeing black people depicted in romantic settings and in a positive setting. So they all had to insert little minstrel type things that demean themselves. My grandfather's father was a coon shouter, and they used to make fun of themselves all the time.
Was a what?
A coon shouter.
What? Run that one.
A coon shouter was like right after slavery or during slavery time.
Yeah.
That would perform for the master.
Okay. Yeah.
And sing songs about, "I wish I could take this black off my skin."
Yeah.
And make fun of himself, and everybody would
Yeah.
laugh. So this was a generation removed from coon shouting.
All right. At the same time, today, 2016, you and I will see a film that has nothing to do with blacks, which will have inserted into it something that makes mockery of blacks today. So when you talk about Schultz wanting this piece inserted into Hot Chocolate, that reminds me of something other than a guy coming up and just saying that. But we'll deal with that at another time. Talk about the Apollo and your grandfather's involvement in the creation of the Apollo.
Well, my grandfather worked for
Apollo Theater.
Yeah, Frank Schiffman was the owner of the Lincoln Theater and the Lafayette. That was his main place. He had the Harlem Opera House too. He finagled his way to taking over the Apollo. He called in my grandfather. My grandfather was working for the Al Capone organization in Chicago. He called my grandfather in back to Harlem to help inaugurate the Apollo Theater and put it on the map and make it the world famous theater that it is today. But as time went on, the audiences in the Apollo were tired of seeing the variety shows that my grandfather was producing, the reviews. They didn't want to see the monkeys. They had a white family to beat the hell out of each other, and they would watch that. They didn't want to see that anymore. They didn't want to see the clowns, and they didn't want to see the chorus line. They wanted to get right to it. They said they paid their money in time. They want to see Louis Armstrong just get up there and start playing, or Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway. They didn't want to see all that filler stuff.
They didn't want to see a show that included Armstrong and Ellington. They wanted to see the guy, acts right then and there.
Yeah, well, they were the headliners.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to see all that, like the genies and everything that was coming in, you know.
Okay.
They wanted to see them.
I came here for a show.
Yeah. And they started tearing up the seats and tearing up the armrests. So Frank Schiffman, and then at the same time that was happening, the chorus line women, that was after their heyday at the Cotton Club and Connie's, and they were getting older. They were more concerned about their finances and their careers, so they joined the union. Okay. And then the Dancers Union made Schiffman have to pay their union wages, and that was messing up his bottom line. So eventually he got rid of my grandfather's reviews and his chorus line for financial reasons. But the times were changing. People were tired of seeing that black audiences were getting a certain amount of pride, and they were tired of he had to ban the blackface comedians, and some of them couldn't perform without the blackface on. And so it was a whole new era. And so they pushed my grandfather out of the Apollo, and he worked in small local night. He was like redlined into small, like Smalls, and he died during the rehearsals at Moraine's. And all these little clubs were hoping that the Harlem Renaissance was going to come back. They were hoping that they could turn back the clock. And every nightclub that opened up, they was hoping that it would bring back the Harlem Renaissance. But the performers were getting older. They would come in, they would, with canes. And, I mean, they would still, they lived to perform and make people happy. And it was, their audiences were different. It was cheaper. And that's when my grandfather died. When his form of entertainment was over, that's when he had his heart attack and died.
However, in terms of the Apollo, he enabled it to get started, a financial foundation for Schiffman.
Yes.
And of course it changed, and then something else had to happen.
Yeah.
Your father. But why was he redlined? You said basically...
he couldn't get work. He could not get work on Broadway. He was always hoping to go back on Broadway.
All right. But let's talk about that because we only have a few more minutes left. The innovations that we either see today or that he brought to Broadway that still remains. I want to go back to that. The innovations that he made that changed the scope of Broadway. I want you to hit that again.
Okay, well, like Busby Berkeley, everybody talks about him. He was on Broadway. He did a lot of these movies with the big chorus lines. He had to send his girls over. My grandfather had a dance studio on Times Square. He owned it. And Busby Berkeley's dancers, Fred Astaire used to send his sister over there because they wanted to learn how to put that extra something in the hip department.
In your book, you mentioned something about the hip, and he had to defend it in terms of some movement that he had.
Yeah, the hip movement, because he said that, well, he basically said that he felt that the black women had a little bit more soul than the white women did. But he trained white women. Ruby Keeler, the famous Ruby Keeler, he was a greatest choreographer. So he trained he trained the Marx Brothers. They all went.
The Marx Brothers.
Yes, they all went over to his studio when he opened it up because they wanted to learn all this black dancing that he was bringing, and moving fast and shaking their hips, and they were doing it with rhythm. It was like an ocean. So they all wanted to get in on it. So he was making money training them.
Okay, your grandfather. And then there's you in show business. Who came between, or did it jump That
It
theatrical
jumped
piece
because
jumped to you.
Yeah, because my grandmother didn't want to talk about him. She didn't want me to get into show business.
Because,
Maybe because she was sour
okay,
with my
from a
grandfather. Plus,
personal
yeah,
thing.
plus she grew up with Adam Powell, and she loved him. He was like a brother to her. They were kids together,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a minister and a politician. She wanted me to go into that.
Okay.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like I'm in both now anyway with these books.
How'd you get involved in the films?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I got hired by a producer, David Golden, and he hired me for Fame, the movie Fame, because they were having problems in the Lower East Side neighborhood.
Okay.
And I was hired to take care of that, and they always were looking for me
Okay.
to work in the black neighborhood or the Hispanic neighborhood. And then when they would go in the white neighborhood, they would cut me out. You know, just like when they went to Chinatown, they would hire a Chinese person.
I tell you, when I saw the Muhammad Ali production in Harlem, they looked like it was 80% other folks.
Yeah.
And that's another story. Dave Schaefer, talk about your dad's friend.
Well, he was a pickaninny. My grandfather was a little child pickaninny. They used to dance for pennies, and like they would dance for pennies and sandwiches and stuff like that. And he formed a group with Dave Schaefer, and George Friedman was older than them, and it was the three of them, and they formed a little dance company. Eventually, Clarence Muse got involved with the company. Clarence Muse became a well-known black actor in the movies in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew him. See, I knew him because he lived in my father's. He stayed at this guy named Uncle CP at 270 Convent Avenue. He stayed. That's where my father's mother and father lived. So Clarence Muse used to be at Uncle CP's house, and Uncle CP used to insult him. He said, "Big Hollywood movie star, you don't even have a quarter."
But that happens to all the big. Look, we only have a minute. Why is this book important to the average reader?
Because it's honest history. It's almost alive. It's as alive as it could get. And it's not no hunky-dory book, and it's not no whitewash thing about the history of black people. This is real history. You know what I mean? Like what you would say, straight and no chaser.
Straight and no chaser.
Straight and no chaser.
Rhythm for Sale. Leonard Harper is the young man that we've been talking about, and the book is available
at Amazon.com.
Okay. What about Sisters Bookstore?
No, Revolution Books.
Revolution Bookstore on Lenox Avenue.
At 132nd Street.
Malcolm X Boulevard, 132nd Street, Revolution Bookstore.
A block away from Leonard Harper Way, by the way. Leonard Harper Way is on 132nd and 7th Avenue, Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard.
Yes.
Revolution Books is on 132nd and Lenox Avenue.
Ladies and gentlemen, and the young people in the audience who desire to pursue theater and all aspects of it, be sure you consider Rhythm for Sale by Grant Harper Reed. It's a very good read. Thank you very much for watching Books That Matter, People Who Matter.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Hope I did all right.
You did better than all right.
Thank you. I aim to please.
Man.
What is your grandfather's name again?
Leonard Harper.
So who is Leonard Reed?
Grant
Leonard
Harper.
Reed, no, Leonard Reed danced. He was a nice man.